In the 1950s, it was generally felt that segregation was constitutional. That was because of the Supreme Court's decision in the last century, in 1896 in Plessy against Ferguson, which upheld the so-called separate but equal doctrine.
In practice, separate meant segregated and second class. Throughout the South, Jim Crow laws required separate facilities for African Americans in almost every area of public life, including restaurants, drinking fountains, theaters, and public schools. Violence and terror tactics limited protest against these conditions. In the 1930s, NAACP lawyer Charles Houston filmed the conditions of black schools in South Carolina. He found wooden schoolhouses with only 1 or 2 teachers who were paid far less than white teachers. Heating stoves sometimes smoked the children out of the building. Black schools stood in sharp contrast with the tidy brick buildings where white children learned. With Houston at the helm of its legal defense fund, the NAACP charted a step-by-step legal strategy to end segregated schools in the United States.
There were still people, even the NAACP, who thought that black people simply had to improve their own worlds and to make them sort of somehow better and more sustainable. Houston said it won't work that way. We have to basically integrate ourselves into all of the public goods and public resources that are around us, and until we do that, we're going to always be considered inferior.
Clarendon County, South Carolina, a rural area in the Black Belt, was one of more than 11,000 segregated school districts in the country. By the late 1940s, conditions had changed little there, despite efforts by the local black community to secure better funding and services for their schools. Organized by NAACP lawyer Thurgood Marshall and AME pastor and schoolteacher Reverend Joseph Delane, 20 African-American parents filed suit against the county school board. Their lawsuit, Briggs versus Elliott, was the first to challenge the constitutionality of public school segregation. Retaliation from the white community was swift. Many who were active in the suit lost their jobs and homes and were denied credit. Reverend Delane was fired as school principal. His church and home were burned to the ground, and finally, he was forced to flee for his life. The NAACP understood they were in this battle for the long haul. In 1951, a week after the trial in South Carolina, lawyers set off for Topeka, Kansas.
We had several cases which had been filed, one in South Carolina, Kansas, Virginia, District of Columbia, and one in Delaware. All had been filed about the same time.
Each of the 5 cases made its way up the judicial ladder through lower court rulings and appeals. The Supreme Court then consolidated the cases into one, Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. By joining the cases, the Supreme Court was sending a message. After more than 50 years, they were ready to directly confront the doctrine of separate but equal.